I included this hand for similar reasons as the other hands, but in this one, we're going to focus on multi-street planning, hand reading, and how backdoor equity impacts our ability to play profitably in position on later streets. The key thing to point out in this hand are the player tendencies and table dynamics. The under the gun player is absolutely going off through more than 200 hands, playing a 91-66 with a 3-bet of 30%, while the middle position player is playing a 30/9 with a 3-bet percentage of 4 through 145 hands. Not surprisingly, the Maniac opens pot under the gun and gets 3-bet to less than pot by the player in middle position. I decide to cold call on the button with Ace Queen Jack 6 double suited. And the original raiser decides to make the call as well. If this were a shallow game, I might consider putting in a cold 4-bet, because typically most players' 3-betting ranges are weaker when they 3-bet less than pot. My hand plays pretty well against a min 3-betting range from this player type. But in this spot, since stacks are well above 200 big blinds effective, the best option is to cold call on the button for the purpose of keeping in both of the fish with a nutty pulling hand that benefits from more players in the pot, in addition to playing deep stacks poker in position. The flop is where the magic happens. After under the gun checks, the original 3-better fires a c-bet of 80 into a pot of 102. Before we make a decision, let's take a second to think about what our options are and what's really going on in the hand. The first thing to look at is how the 3-betting range of our opponent interacts with this board texture. While it's true he's only 3-betting 4% so far, the fact that he min 3-bet makes his range wider. But it's still more likely that he's 3-betting big cards than he is smaller rundowns overall. So on this board, he's probably c-betting with a king and side cards, air, and occasionally a set of kings. Sometimes he'll have aces, but that's heavily discounted because of his 3-bet sizing, and because we have a blocker to the aces. Next, let's think about what our options are. Bluff raising can't be good because we take away our ability to leverage our stack on later streets. Plus, we make his life easier by reopening the action, which means he can avoid playing later streets against us by sticking in the rest of his stack. And given what we've said about his 3-betting range and the board texture, he's going to be at least peeling us a very high percentage of the time in this spot. Floating is definitely our best option, and here's why. First, the most obvious reason is that we're in position with a lot of money behind, against a player whose range is well defined. Second, there's a variety of turn cards that either give us good opportunities to bluff, or that we pick up equity on. We already know that it's very unlikely for him to have a wrap or any of the straight draws on this board texture. So what this means is that we're going to rep all of the low cards that fill straights and 2-pair combos to try to push him off his hand. And besides, just like I mentioned, any diamond or club gives us a flush draw, and any ace, queen, jack, or 10 gives us a straight draw or a pair. Simply put, we can either represent the straight or pick up equity on almost every single turn card in the deck. When you combine all of this with the fact that we're in position with a bunch of money behind, you have a very profitable floating opportunity, my friends. One thing we haven't talked about is the danger of the under the gun player check raising us out of the pot. That'll happen occasionally, but for the most part, I'm not concerned about it, because since he's playing so loose pre-flop, there's very few hands that are strong enough to check raise this board. So given that this board is so dry, he'll be kicking his hand into the muck a high percentage of the time. So as I said, we decide to call and float the flop, and as we predicted, the under the gun player folds his hand. On the turn, even though I didn't pick up any backdoor equity besides 2 pair outs, which, by the way, probably aren't clean anyway, I'm still going to follow through with my plan to push him off his hand by representing the straight over the next 2 streets. After he checks, since my mind is made up that I'm firing 2 more barrels, the next step is picking the right bet sizing. The key is to pick an amount that both gives you some fold equity on the turn, but leaves you with approximately a pot-sized bet going into the river. Here, I decided to pick 200, which will leave him with a $630 stack on the river, with a pot size of about 662. I've read in books where it's game theory optimal to always leave yourself with exactly a pot-sized bet going into the river when you have a nuts or nothing range. But in spots where I know they're going to be check folding the river a high percentage of the time, I think it's better to choose a bigger bet size on the turn, because not only do you get more fold equity, but you collect more dead money when they check fold on the river. Anyhow, on the river, it's just a matter of following through with the bluff. He checks, we set him all in, he snap folds, and we scoop a nice pot with the nothing. So what did we learn from this hand? Well, calling with one hand and representing another is the essence of strong PLO play. and it's important to always pay attention to not only what cards give you backdoor equity, but also which ones you can credibly represent a hand on. A friend of mine calls them ghost outs. I really like that, and you can use it too if you'd like.